Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. The Middle East is at a crossroads. Does Iran go ahead with its plans to attack Israel for the killing of Ismail Haniyeh just over 2 weeks ago in Tehran? Does Hezbollah attack Israel for the killing of its military commander, Fuad Shukar, in Beirut, also just over 2 weeks ago? And does the region become engulfed in a wider war? Or do the talks in Doha succeed? Does a hostage deal get reached? And is war averted? How does this play out? What does Benjamin Netanyahu want to see happen? And is the country really ready for war or for a hostage deal that comes with what could be a political price for the prime minister, who is finally, as we saw last week, back up in the polls? And also, how does the upcoming US presidential election fit into all of this, if at all? These are some of the questions my JPPI colleague Shmuel, Rosner, Avi Gil, and I dissect on today's episode. Is Israel on the path to war or to de-escalation? Here we go. Avi and Shmuel, thank you very much for joining me. It's great to have you both back on the show. And we're talking because we're now just over 2 weeks since the twin or double assassination of Fuad Shukar, the Hezbollah military commander, Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader, one in Beirut, one in Tehran, Israel bracing for the last now 15, 16 days for a possible retaliation, which has yet to come. And we were just kind of kidding off camera whether Iran should even attack. They've basically kind of, chalked up a victory by the sense that they have everybody waiting and nothing's happening. And every day we keep on thinking, is this the day? Is this not the day? When is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? Where will it happen? So I'm curious, Shmuel, let's start with you. I mean, just your sense of where we are in time right now, and also to our viewers and listeners, just an understanding, we're speaking as the Israeli delegation is arriving in Doha in Qatar for a new round of negotiations that could potentially lead to a hostage deal that has the potential to de-escalate everything that's going on here in the region. So there's a lot of different moving pieces all at once.
Yeah, well, first of all, I must say that from the sense I get, Israelis are not hysterical about the prospect of Iran retaliating or Hezbollah retaliating. I see people in coffee shops and restaurants and shows, less so in hiking and biking around the country. It is an awkward situation, but Israelis understand that things are all in flux. We are getting used to being at war. It's been 10 months since the war started, and most of us got back to our day-to-day life, and we try to compartmentalize the two things that we must deal with: the routine of work, family, whatever people are doing, and the fact that we know that something dramatic could happen at every minute or every day, whether it's an inflammation of the front, of the northern front, or a retaliation from Iran or anything else, and people just got used to it. They listen to the radio, they get updated, but by and large, most of us are just doing what we do.
And Avi, I mean, with that said, that people are going about their lives, I mean, there is a regional kind of posturing that I don't think we've seen that many times in history, or definitely not in recent history. A mass military buildup of the Americans that we're seeing here with the Lincoln, with the nuclear-powered submarine, with the F-22 Raptors, with the amphibious vessels to evacuate non-combatants and the destroyers to intercept, and a massive buildup, very similar in size almost to what we saw after October 7th with President Biden's famous don't speech. I mean, there is definitely, they wouldn't be sending all that here if they didn't think that maybe there is a chance that Iran will do something, and if they didn't want to try to deter. So the region is bracing to an extent.
Well, especially today, it's a very interesting and dramatic day in the annals of this conflict, because there is a sort of turning point one way is leading towards a regional war, unheard of in such a magnitude in the region. And the other road is leading to a ceasefire and the return of some of our hostages. So we are in a position of a quite dramatic crossroad, and many commentators tends to analyze in rational terms the interest of the parties, not to deteriorate into a full-fledged regional war that Iran will calculate, if at all, retaliation. The same thing about Hezbollah. But let us not forget that there are various irrational decisions that took place in the recent weeks and months. So I would suggest, although we see people in Israel enjoying their time in coffee shops and restaurants, I wouldn't recommend to be totally indifferent to the potential deterioration that may happen.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I'm not indifferent, but I do want to say that I of course I agree with Avi that this is a dramatic moment and that there is a fork in the road leading to well, he said two possibilities. I'll say three. He said it's either the end of war or a regional conflict. I think that there is still a middle ground. You can envision a situation in which some retaliation takes place and Israel responds to the response, and yet it does not turn into a regional conflict. I think one of the reasons for which the United States sent here so many forces is in order to try and contain the situation, even in case that we see retaliation from Hamas, from Hezbollah in Iran. So yes, the danger for regional conflict is there. The hope and possibility, even though I'm not quite optimistic about it, but the possibility of an end to hostilities is also there. But there is also the possibility of just continuation of what we've seen in recent months. The ups and downs of a conflict that is going on, with some points in which the tension is higher or the violence is more pronounced, and some other points in which it is the reduced level.
Let me also just add to that. I think I tend to agree with you on those three different options, but I'll just add that also today we're on the precipice of a possible wider conflict. We're on hopefully, I think we all hope that there will be a deal for the hostages, and maybe that will de-escalate everything that's happening in the region. And the third track that's actually happening is today you have, I think it's 2 or 3 kibbutzim, Mifasim, Nir Am, and maybe another one, that their residents are returning home, after spending the last 10 plus months in hotels. They're going back to their homes, the kibbutzim along the border in Otef Aza, along that Gaza envelope, which, even though the war is still continuing in Gaza, there is an attempt by the government to try to bring people back to their communities and try to get on with life. So this idea of Israel learning to live alongside conflict in a bigger way is something that is almost ingrained within us as a people, right? I mean, it's being compelled upon some of these people. And I was listening to some of the residents this morning speaking about their concerns and fear of going back home, where you'll probably still hear booms and explosions.
And not all of them are going back.
And not all of them are going back.
Some of them refuse to go back.
Right. Some of them still have that trauma, and totally, I mean, who are we to judge them? But there is this attempt, at least, to try to keep living as we're still fighting at the same time. Let me ask you, Avi, as this happens, one of the things that I'm hearing from the Americans is that they fear that they are being dragged into a war. Almost, they fear that they have this big buildup, and I think Shmuel's right to some extent, is that this huge armada of vessels that's here is meant to, yes, deter Hezbollah and Iran, but it's also meant to deter Israel from doing anything in a big way. However, their concern is that if there is going to be some round and Israel and Iran and Israel and Hezbollah are going to exchange blows, and let's say the Iranians or the Hezbollah decide to attack some of these now many more American targets in the region, what would that do to them? So they're a bit concerned also about that prospect. How do you view that?
Well, I think that here you see the gap in the positions of the United States and Israel. It's very clear that Washington wants to prevent the deterioration into a regional war. They don't want to be part of a regional war, and they are doing their utmost to deter all parties not to engage in such an escalation. This is one thing. The other thing, which is highly connected to that, is the American pressure on Israel in also on the other involving in the ceasefire agreement, which is going to be dealt with in Doha, in Qatar. Because that, according to the American way of thinking, would de-escalate as well the situation and would decrease the chance of deteriorating into a regional war. And if you read the New York Times piece this morning about the situation, the way the American officials are describing the Israeli achievements in the Gaza war as if we are actually accomplished what can be accomplished. This is, to me, a very clear sign that America wants to provide us with justification for a ceasefire, which with facts which I would put a big question mark on them with regard to the argument that we have accomplished everything that can be accomplished militarily speaking vis-a-vis Hamas.
And I would just say also to that point, I saw that as well. And clearly they want to make us feel good so we can go towards a deal. But the real victory here, I think to some extent, and I hear this from government ministers also, close also to Netanyahu, is that it's ending Hamas's rule in Gaza. And that has yet to be achieved. We might have broken the back of the Hamas military organization by taking out a lot of their battalion commanders and killing 20,000, let's say, of their fighters, and destroying a lot of their infrastructure, but we haven't ended the Hamas rule in Gaza. And Shmuel, when we tend to poll people right here at JPPI and ask them, are they in favor of a ceasefire? Do they want to continue the war fighting? I mean, what's your sense, just A, on the polling, but B, on where we are at this point in time?
Well, I don't think Israelis are buying the if the American officials are trying to convince us that we already won the war, I think most Israelis have one of two positions. Either they think that we can't win the war and hence we need to end it, or they think that we didn't yet win the war and hence we need to continue it. But none of the two factions believe that we actually won the war. Look, you mentioned earlier the members of the small kibbutzim in the south that the government is trying to compel and send back to their homes. This is easy with a small kibbutz. It will be much more complicated with the number of people who were evacuated from Israel's north. If you try to send all the residents of Kiryat Shmona back to their homes when Hezbollah is still situated on the border, and the Americans, with all due respect, they can pressure Israel to stop the war, but what they were able to achieve in their ongoing talks in Lebanon is not quite impressive. I don't see an agreement on the table with Hezbollah moving backwards or withdrawing its forces from the Israeli border. Up and until Israelis feel secure to live near the border, I don't think the government can easily send them back to their homes, and I don't think the Americans will have an easy way to convince us that that we could say, you know, this is victory and we can go back to our routine. We should say, and here I'm sure Avi will have a lot to say, that the Israeli government, you know, we don't want Hamas to rule Gaza, but up until now, the Israeli government refuses to say who's going to replace Hamas as the ruler. Someone needs to rule Gaza, and the Israeli government is quite evasive when it comes to answering the question, who's going to be that entity? You know, they'll give you some vague answers, you know, local Palestinians, other Palestinians. I don't see a potential candidate to be the ruler of Gaza that the Israeli government presented to the public or to the world. And hence for us to say, well, we don't want Hamas. Yeah, well, present an alternative.
Best answer I got when I asked somebody in the government is who's going to, an Arab. You know, some Arab's going to do it. But Avi, let me. I want to hear what you have to say just about what Shmuel said. But give us also. I mean, you know, there's Muhammad Dahlan, who I'm sure you know, the former ruler of Gaza to some extent, the Fatah guy who was kicked out back in 2007 when Hamas took over Gaza. There's obviously the PA. There's Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen. I mean, what are the options here that even exist or are on the table?
Well, let me tell you first that for Hamas not to rule Gaza in civilian terms, it's not necessarily a disadvantage at the, let's say, first or second year of the efforts to rehabilitate Gaza. Their first priority is to maintain their military power and not necessarily to take responsibility on rehabilitating Gaza. So I think that our more important worry should be Hamas's military capabilities than its governing of Gaza. Now, with regard to, let's say, other Palestinian elements, Dahlan or PA or what have you, I think that we have to realize that with the current power left to Hamas, no Palestinian entity, Dahlan or whoever, be able to govern Gaza neglecting Hamas. So Hamas is going, if it is with its current military power, Hamas is going to continue performing as a player, important player. And I think that any Palestinian would have somehow to accommodate and to cooperate with Hamas if it wants to govern Gaza.
It's actually very interesting what you're saying, because you're almost painting a picture, Avi, that makes that Hamas can actually morph into more of a Hezbollah style structure, right? Hezbollah is not the de facto, is not the official front ruler of Lebanon. It's the de facto ruler of Lebanon, but it's more of a military force, but it does have its political puppets that it uses and puts in place to also continue to control the country. But Hamas, you're saying, might even have a benefit moving away from the civilian control. Let some other Arab or Palestinian be the face of it. We will be the power behind whoever that is. And actually, it's an interesting way for them to potentially survive and continue to grow in the day after this war.
You see, if you read carefully what Salam Fayyad, Dahlan, Jibril Rajoub, they are all, in a way, speaking about integrating Hamas in some way or another to the next regime that will control Gaza. I don't think that any of them is ready to complete the fight against Hamas and to do the job for Israel.
Yeah. Shmuel, I want to shift gears for a moment because this was interesting to me. For the first time on Friday, there was a poll in one of the Israeli newspapers showing that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party is once again the top party if elections were to be held then on Friday, but today, let's call it. And up to 22 seats. Benny Gantz's party, which just a month and a half, 2 months ago, was up at 30 seats, is now down to 20. Another interesting, surprising party that's growing in strength is Yisrael Beitenu, Avigdor Lieberman, which is up. But Netanyahu has managed to pull off the impossible, right? 10 months ago, people would have eulogized him, would have said that he's done. There's no way he comes back from this. And look, here he is. And he's back up to 22. How does this all factor in to this just whole mosaic of calculations that he has to make in all the decisions that he's got in front of him right now? Iran, Hezbollah, and of course a hostage deal.
Well, it means that politically speaking, he was wise all along. He knew that he must buy time because only with time he can resurrect his standing with some of the Israeli public. We should, as a side note, it's true that the Likud party is getting stronger, but the coalition, the whole block of the right-wing coalition is not getting much stronger. It doesn't yet have a potential to have a repeat and get reelected as the current coalition. So the situation is somewhat more fluid, with many Israelis just sitting on the sidelines waiting to see what new parties are offered to them when there's election. Clearly, Naftali Bennett, whom we saw in the last 2 days, giving an interview to the New York Times and publicly speaking at an event in Israel about the need to replace the government of Israel and the leadership of Israel. So clearly he's making the moves towards building his own platform and running in the next election. But again, you're asking what this means politically. It means that for the coalition, buying time is the first priority. And of course, you see some possible contradiction here between the need for Israel to win and end the war and the need for the coalition to win but continue the current situation in such way that will not enforce new elections. And this is a contradiction that we see all along. If you're more cynical, you'll suspect that Netanyahu is trying to prolong the war for political reasons. If you're less cynical, you'll say, well, the war is prolonged for other reasons, but it also serves him politically.
Avi, in another one of the calculations, though, that Israel does have to make is the U.S. presidential election. And I always think back to Operation Cast Lead in 2008-9, which started, I think it was December 28th, December 29th of 2008, and moved into January of 2009. And this was in the in-between period between Bush, George W., and Barack Obama, who was taking office, and he was taking office January 20th. The operation, I looked the other day, ended 1 or 2 days before the inauguration of President Obama, right? And it seemed at the time, then it was Ehud Olmert who was the prime minister, but it was clear Israel was not going to have this war going on as a new president takes office. And I'm curious if you think that in also some of the calculations that they're making in the prime minister's office and in the security cabinet, November is something of, we got to get this wrapped up by then. We got to be out of Gaza by then, because whether it's going to be Kamala or Trump, whoever it is who comes, that period between November and January, when Biden will feel less bound to any specific policy and wouldn't want to do something that could undermine Harris's potential presidential run, that could be the period that Israel could see itself facing maybe another UN Security Council style resolution 2334, which came at the end of the Obama period in that same 2-month window. So, I mean, how much do you think that this plays a role, if at all?
Well, I think that we are a bit exaggerating thinking or imagining that the Israeli government is calculating long-term strategies.
I forgot, right? That never happens here.
So I'm not sure that such calculations are very, I mean, they have a huge weight in what we are doing now. I mean, try to give me a simple explanation why we are maintaining for 10 months a strategy of containment of Hezbollah in order to focus in our war against Hamas in Gaza, and at the same time, we are killing a Palestinian Hamas leader in the heart of Tehran. Is it in order to contain Iran? So I don't think that, I really think that we shouldn't exaggerate with the strategic talent of the current Israeli government. I see lots of mistakes, and if I would add just one short point to what you've discussed earlier with Shmuel, we spoke that the current days are positioning Israel in front of a strategic crossroad, but that strategic crossroad has implication internally, namely on the internal politics of Israel, and each road that we are going to take or be forced to take may have internal implications and can early the life of this government.
Very interesting, and lots of food for thought here from the two of you. So I want to thank you both, Avi Gil and Shmuel Rosner. And I want to thank all of our viewers and listeners, wishing you a quiet weekend. A Shabbat Shalom. We will be back Monday and Thursday for another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. In the meantime, have